Hello and welcome to this overview of the essential takeaways from BNamericas Infrastructure Outlook for 2022. My name is Laura Suberno. I'm a senior editor at BNamericas, and I am joined by three members of our infrastructure editorial team, Rogerio Gelmayer, Javiera Gracia, and Ariel Rodriguez. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So, the backdrop that we're seeing going into 2022 is one of a push to keep economic growth going after the strong rebound growth that we saw in 2021. So as a region, Latin America and the Caribbean GDP growth is forecast at about 3% for 2022, according to the IMF, which combined with the estimated 6.3% expansion this year would push the region back into positive territory growth-wise following the collective 7% contraction that occurred in 2020. Now, some experts, however, are talking about the possibility of very low growth or even possibly recession in some countries, including, some have said, Brazil, which is the region's biggest economy. So we do see some countries really looking to push tenders and project development to drive the economy and also to keep political promises in many cases. And then in some cases, there could actually be some slowdown due to elections coming up and some political uncertainty. Overall, our outlook here at BNamericas is mostly neutral to positive for 2022 Latin American infrastructure investment, with some unknowns relating to political processes threatening to cloud the outlook a little bit. So I will turn now to our editorial team to take us around the region and give us a picture of what is expected to take place in terms of the advance of infrastructure programs and tenders. Rogerio, will you please start us out with what you see happening in Brazil?
Hello, Laura. Thanks. As you mentioned, Laura, for the next year, the Brazilian economy is expected to decelerate compared with this year. And the big picture for the next year is on the fact that the Brazilian government seeks to accelerate its infrastructure program under the offer of concessions for a lot of infrastructure projects, especially airports, ports, highways, and the highways, and also in the sanitation segment. But the difference compared with this year, with that program, is that most offers likely to take place during the first half of the year. Because in October next year, we have a general election in Brazil, including election for the president and also for the state government. So investors likely to take a approach more reluctant to go ahead with the offers, the auctions. So the government also try to avoid this turbulence. Also, another important difference for the next year in terms of projects is on the financing side. The Selic, the interest rate of Brazil, is increasing a lot. Just as a comparison, it started last year this year at 2%, and it is already at 7.75%, and it is representing an increase in financial costs for investors and also for companies. And this is a headwind for the projects in terms of infrastructure. So this is the main picture in Brazil, Laura.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rogerio. Javi, why don't we jump to you and tell us what's happening with programs and tenders over in Chile and Argentina?
Well, in both Chile and Argentina have seen public works as a very key component of economic recovery. In fact, even though Chile plans to lower the public spending by 22% in its next year's budget, the Public Works Ministry is actually going to increase. And that's not even counting the consensus agenda for next year, which includes projects for about $4.7 billion. Sorry, this is actually lower than the consensus agenda of this year, but it's actually still very well above the average seen between 2010 and 2018, the latter being the year the current government took over. But there's also the wild card of the Chilean presidential election. Keep in mind, I will explain this a bit later, but their candidates haven't made a lot of statements regarding infrastructure, especially the concession system. And a lot of people have interpreted this as if it ain't broke, don't fix it, or they're maybe not planning to reinvent the wheel. Now in Argentina, we have a very uncertain scenario. On one hand, the government wants to avoid decreasing public investments, especially in the wake of the electoral defeat of the ruling coalition in the midterms. But at the same time, they also see public works as a way to not only boost the economy, but also help them to gain better footing in the negotiations with the IMF.
Perfect. Okay. Interesting scenario. Thank you very much, Javi. Aria, let's jump over to you. Tell us what's going on in Mexico.
Hello, everyone. And yes, just like you said, Laura, it was a very difficult year for Mexico too. We had a lot of priorities that came before projects, and we were impacted by a migration flow from Central America and other countries. For 2022, what we are predicting is that a lot of private projects are going to move forward, a lot of public-private partnerships. And that's because most of the public projects backed by the AMLO administration have already been awarded, or those have already been tendered. So we expect a lot of public-private partnership projects to move forward in 2022. We've spoken with several developers, builders, and they have told us that they have a lot of plans for next year. What's missing is the political will or the political confirmation to do so. Now, just yesterday or this last week of November, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador met with several key players in the private sector, and he also released a decree that prioritizes public works and shields them from legal attempts. This could be seen or interpreted as a announcement that a new infrastructure package with help from the private sector will be presented next year. We've been waiting for this third infrastructure package since early 2021, and the government says it wants to release it. The private sector says it wants to invest. All it's missing is the presentation and the tenders to be released.
Interesting. Sounds like there could be a big wave of opportunity there next year. I will go ahead and walk us through what's happening, what we expect to see in the Andean region. In Colombia, the fourth generation or 4G roads program, which was a $12 billion program, is going to be reaching about 80% completion or more during 2022, with 10 or 12 projects expected to be delivered in the first 6 or 8 months of the year. And then the slightly larger 5G program is going to be getting started. So there's a lot of expectation around that. The government of President Ivan Duque aims to concession out the first wave of 5G projects, which includes 14 projects, before leaving power in August, and then also to leave most of the second wave of 5G projects in structuring such that the future government really has no excuses to not go ahead with those. In Ecuador, the government is working on a program of about 18 projects, most of which they're looking to do through PPPs, and they do have some time still to work on those. The Lasso government just started this year, and they have until, that's a program for the next few years through the 2025. But they're really looking to attract those private investors as soon as possible. And in Peru, the government has defined an initial budget for public investment in 2022 of a bit over $10 billion. And that includes several projects that they're looking to execute under the government-to-government contracts that have gained favor in that country among some sides, some political sides. And separately, the investment agency ProInversión has a portfolio of 6.3 billion in PPP projects targeted for 2021 and 2022, a 2-year portfolio. If we look at the National Infrastructure Plan, which is 52 priority projects, which includes both public works and PPPs, that really struggled to advance in 2021 in Peru. The political situation was very difficult, and the need to promote the reactivation of the economy is going to be favorable for getting those auctions going next year. So now that we've kind of seen what the broad view is for in terms of the infrastructure programs and the goals of the different countries, I'd like each of you to mention 1 or 2 particular projects that are going to be active or particularly attractive to watch in 2022. Javi, would you like to start us out in Chile?
Sure, thank you. First off, Américo Vespucio Oriente Tramo 1, aka AVO 1. Well, this is the Chile's concession system has gained praise all over, but it's not without its flaws. And one of the, I guess, the most complaints is how long it takes to execute something. And in AVO 1's case is that it was awarded in 2014, but it couldn't start works until around late 2017, early 2018. It's expected to open provisionally next year and will be fully open by 2023. And at the same time, Américo Vespucio Oriente Sección 2, or AVO 2, will begin works next year, but under a different concessionary than AVO 1. And the other project that is very interesting in Chile is the Maule Health Network, which is actually a part of the government's PPP hospital program. This is a project that includes 3 hospitals in the central South Maule region. And the interesting part of this is that it was awarded to a consortium involving Spanish and Chinese firms. So this will be the first hospital concession to have a firm from China involved in the execution.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, Javi. Ariel, in Mexico, what are the key projects we should be watching next year?
Well, Laura, as I said before, these public mega projects works keep on being built, right? We're talking about the Mayan train, for example, but there is a big portfolio of projects that has not been released, and it's expected to hopefully be presented next year. This government has put a lot of attention, or has bet on train projects, and several of these projects have not gone out to tender, even though they have been presented in the country's national infrastructure program. So we could see those projects being tendered away next year, mainly because the president has said that he does not want to leave any major project unfinished by the end of his 6-year term, which ends in 2024. This means the public and private sector only has 2022, 2023, and very little of 2024 to complete projects, according to the president's promise. I'd like to go over a little about the status of the country's national infrastructure program, which includes mainly public-private partnerships. And so far, the government has presented 68 projects of around 525 billion pesos, which is $26 billion, right? We are waiting for the 3rd package, and in this 3rd package, we could see up to 15 communications and transportation projects, and many of those could be or are expected to be train projects, passenger and freight. We're also waiting for a lot of port projects because the AMLO administration has been very slow on port concessions. So we could see that moving forward next year as well.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you, Ariel. Rogerio, tell us, which are the points we should be looking at in Brazil specifically?
Yes, Laura. So one of the main segments looking with attention among stakeholders in infrastructure segment is the sanitation. the sanitation projects in Brazil. For the next year, there is a huge investment program likely to take place. It has private sector companies assuming the concession of Rio de Janeiro sanitation concession, the Rio de Janeiro state. And also, the Brazilian government, the federal government, is supporting a lot of state governments in structuring new concessions, also still in the sanitation segment. So currently, 6% of the segment is controlled by private sector companies, and the expectation is that in the next few years, 40% of the segment will control by private sector companies. So we are waiting and expecting a lot of investments in sanitation segment, which actually already started to motivate different players. We have the data with project finance operations in the third quarter, and of the 10 largest operations in Latin America, 2 of them were involved in the sanitation program in Brazil. So this is a sector that you're looking for a vibrant situation, you know.
Fantastic. A lot of privatization going to be going on over the next months or years. Okay, thank you, Rogerio. And hopping back over to the Andean region, I would say the top projects in Colombia that we're keeping an eye on are the ones coming up first in Colombia's 5G program. Those are going to be the Ruta del Agua and the Via Buga Buenaventura highways, large projects at 850 million, 600 million respectively, as well as the new airport for Cartagena, which is going to cost more than $600 million as well. Now in Peru, 2 key contracts that are targeted for tender in 2022 are going to be the construction of a ring road in the capital city, Lima, estimated to cost almost $2 billion, and also the rehabilitation and operating contract of nearly 1,000 kilometers of highway known as the Longitudinal de la Sierra, stretch number 4. And the cost of that is around $700 million. So those are going to be the big tenders in Peru. And in Ecuador, the biggest tender on the table will be the Southern Guayaquil Viaduct, a project that could cost up to $800 million. And there's also a port project in Esmeraldas that the government is looking to advance next year. So we've seen what the government wants to do. The governments want to do the projects that are on the table and that they are trying to advance. But let's talk a little bit about the growing concern over the political climate that we're seeing in a lot of Latin America. Even though infrastructure is often seen as a basic necessity, and we often hear people talking about how the governments understand that, there is a climate of uncertainty a lot of times. So I wanted to ask each of you to describe the situation in your countries of expertise and how much that is likely to impact infrastructure contracts and activity in the year ahead. Do you want to start, Javi, telling us about Chile and Argentina?
Well, Laura, you probably heard this a billion times by now, but Chile is now heading to an incredibly polarizing presidential runoff, which is scheduled for December 19. On one hand, we have Gabriel Boric, one of the former leaders of the 2011 student protests, and now he's representing the Apruebo Dignidad coalition on the left wing. And on the other, we have José Antonio Cast, a former lawmaker for the UDI, which is a right-wing party in the currently ruling coalition, but now he's running as his own party, the far-right Partido Republicano. Yet, when you go to infrastructure and water, you actually find a couple of things that they agree on. For example, they both agree that they have to address immediately the drought, but obviously they have differences on how the state should, how much presence the state should have. But you don't, like I said before, you don't see a lot of specific proposals in terms of infrastructure. And some people, including former Public Works Minister Carlos Cruz, who I talked to for this report, said that this likely means that they don't have any radical ideas. Nobody's talking about mass privatizations or nationalizations. And for him and other actors, they believe that the investors still are betting on Chile in terms of infrastructure contracts. We saw that with the tender of Route 78, which got like 7 or 8 bidders for a very large contract, $800 million approx. And that's because infrastructure at the end of the day is a very long-term investment. And maybe that's why investors keep believing in Chile. They don't believe that short-term electoral shocks might affect them so much. And there's also the situation in Congress. No party got any majority. So despite some more radical statements that sometimes are outside economics or infrastructure, it's unlikely they can neither Boric or Kass can pass anything too radical. Now in Argentina. Now back to Argentina, we have the following issue. It's very unpredictable. It's always been very unpredictable. To give a bit of a comparison, the year after the 2017 midterm, Mauricio Macri was actually right on a high status. They got a better than expected result, and they were expecting to launch a flurry of PPPs, and that got wiped out even before the half of 2018. And now we have Alberto Fernandez, who's actually in a worse situation than Macri was after the midterm. But there's also the possibility, because Argentina is so focused on public investment, any shakeup Buenos Aires could have massive consequences for public works, especially because even when provincial administrations are the ones executing projects, most of their financing comes through the federal government. So very uncertain times for Argentina, as basically they're always been. But they also try to go a lot to multilaterals, the World Bank, the IDB, and especially CIF, Latin American Development Bank. And they expect to keep that area of revenue there. But at the same time, there's also another problem for public spending, is that after the PASO or primaries in September, which the ruling coalition got pretty bruised, the government decided to shift its focus towards more direct economic aids. For example, raising the minimum wage or increasing the threshold for income taxes. And this could put some pressure on public financing for infrastructure projects, especially since concessions are very, very rare.
Right, of course. Thank you very much, Javi. Sounds like Chile is steadier than it might seem. Look, considering the elections and in Argentina, it's kind of what we've been seeing for some time now. A lot of unpredictability, as you say, and uncertainty. Let's jump over to Ardiel. Will you tell us what's going on in Mexico?
Sure. So the elephant in the room is obviously this energy reform, electrical reform that the AMLO administration has been trying to pass in Congress, and has a market and experts, alarmed. But as you would see in our report, we decided to go for yellow light and green light in infrastructure, and that's because, according to the experts, developers, and CEOs we have spoken to, this debates over the energy sector are not affecting the infrastructure sector, and that's very hard to believe for some, but it seems to be the reality, and that's because builders want to build, and Mexico is very advanced in the PPPs and contracts for highways and other public work projects. So it does not look like the political chaos that's going on right now with the electrical reform, with the energy sector, with politics in general, has been affecting infrastructure work so far. So we believe that the outlook will be very positive unless the administration decides not to release tenders, not to accept private money to build projects, which does not seem to be the case. I believe we will see a lot of projects moving forward, as I've said before. And I think AMLO has been growing as a builder himself. He has launched a lot of projects, and he wants to see infrastructure growing in the country in general. So that's our outlook for the country this year in terms of political sector.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Sounds like fairly positive. That's good to hear. Rogério, how about Brazil? We've got elections next year. What's going on there?
Exactly, Laura. We are entering the next year in an election process in Brazil regarding the election for the president and also for the state's governors. And if you look at the profile of the main candidates in Brazil, we don't see signs of a rupture, signs of a change in the plans of the concessions program. Of course, there is minor differences between candidates, but we don't expect signs of a rupture in terms of the concession programs. However, the political situation in Brazil carries a secondary risk for infrastructure projects. Investors are looking for the fiscal responsibility of the next Brazilian government. And this has a direct effect in inflation and also in interest rate. If you're looking for Brazil in historic terms, all the time that Brazil has had a high level of interest rates, the level of investments in infrastructure was too low, because it's difficult to dispute the pockets of investors with the government bonds that pay the double-digit levels of interest rates, you know. So the main risk for infrastructure projects in the future is linked with the fiscal stability of Brazil. So the main thing, the main focus will be in economic terms for the next administration.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rogério. And again, I will tell everyone about what's happening in the Andean region. Colombia is going to be marked in 2022 by the presidential elections happening in May. So we have elections there as well, which could influence the infrastructure sector and cause a slowdown, at least in the first part of the year, until the air clears and it's possible to foresee the direction that the country will be taking over the coming years. As I said before, the Duque administration is working to leave the 5G program well underway, and the program can be expected to continue to advance under the future government. However, a victory for the candidate who is currently the front runner, Gustavo Petro, who is a left-leaning ex-guerrilla senator, could bring quite a bit of just general uncertainty to the country that might take a little longer to clear, I think. In Ecuador, the conservative president, Guillermo Lasso, is behind private investment, but faces a complex political environment with problems in the National Assembly and challenges in managing security and indigenous opposition, all of which could conceivably impact contracts at some point. And in Peru, in general terms, there's an environment of uncertainty around the leftist president, Pedro Castillo, who, as I said before, came to power in 2021, and how his proposals will play out given the fragmented and opposition-controlled Congress. His initial discourse on nationalizations has been toned down considerably, however, and the need to advance infrastructure for economic growth appears to be understood. The government has said that it is making improvements in contract management and is preparing regulation to accelerate the expropriation of land destined for projects, which has been an issue in the past in the government completing or complying with its side of the contracts in order for builders to be able to actually build. So that is what we see for the Andean in terms of political risk. And now that we've gone over all these key issues, to wrap up our discussion today, I wanted to ask each of you just overall how you would rate the outlook for infrastructure in 2022 in your countries of coverage, positive, neutral, or maybe a negative or use caution assessment. On my side, I can say that for Peru and Ecuador, our outlook is neutral overall. This is when we take all the elements that we've assessed together, we kind of get a neutral average. And for Colombia, we've assigned a positive outlook despite some of that uncertainty that could arise as the elections approach in May and depending on the result. But we're pretty positive on Colombia in terms of going ahead with all those programs that are under structuring and under tendering in the coming year. What are you guys? I want to ask you about your assessments in the same way for the rest of the countries that are under coverage. Ariel, you mentioned in your last comments the green and yellow light. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Is that your overall outlook for infrastructure next year?
Yeah, sure, Laura. And I think I got a little ahead on my previous comment, but nevertheless, it complements what I'm going to say now. We believe it's going to be neutral, but hinting to positive. And that hinting is because we just don't know whether the government will decide to just release all these tenders that has the private sector bullish and excited. And if this all these projects get released and we start seeing a lot of movement of tendering and developers getting together and starting all these train projects, in addition to highways and some ports, it's probably going to move to green. But for now, we're just going to stick to yellow, neutral, just because we don't know when this new package will be released. But as of now, we still have a lot of projects going on so far, and a lot of them will continue to be constructed throughout the year.
Perfect, thank you. Let's jump over to Javiera. Give us your overall outlook assessment for the year to come.
Okay, so my assessment for Chile in particular is neutral to positive. Neutral doesn't mean anything bad, by the way. It just means business as usual. Like I said, there seems like none of the candidates plans to do anything too radical to the current infrastructure system. At the same, and the question will be like they will decide to speed up what has been done before, will decide to slow a little down, or they will try, or in the case of Boric, will they first try to see if they can pass higher taxes in order to get their stuff done. And in the case of Kast, the big question if he's going to even be allowed to rule the full 4 years because of the Constitutional Convention and because, let's face it, protests wouldn't give him peace for a single day. But like I said before, investors still believe in Chile, and that's because of the long-term nature of infrastructure contracts. Like as we saw with the concession tenders, there's a very interesting portfolio going up next year. And at the same time, there's also increasing budgets for the public works that are financed by the state. Argentina, on the other hand, is more neutral to negative. In the case of, like I said, very dependent on the federal government's financing. And there's also the issue that the whole electoral debacle that the Peronismo or Kirchnerismo in this case suffered in the midterms caused a political split between Cristina Fernandez and Alberto Fernandez. And the question is which of the two will end up effectively leading the ship in the next 2 years. And that could also mean that some provinces could see more funds from the federal government than others, regarding on which side of the divide ends the provincial governors end up falling in.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Javi. Rogério, how about for Brazil?
Yes, Laura, in Brazil, the outlook is neutral to positive. Positive, the explanation is that no main candidates in Brazil show so far reluctance against the concession agenda. Main presidential candidates in Brazil shows no reluctance against the private sector investment in infrastructure. However, the neutral side of this situation, which can be considered the downside of the situation, is the fiscal picture in Brazil. You need to see in the next year the performance of the government accounts and also the promises of the candidates in fiscal terms, to see how long the interest rate in Brazil will persist at high levels and how this can contaminate the sentiment of investors in the infrastructure sector.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rogerio. Thank you, Javiera. Thank you, Ariel, for joining and sharing your expertise today. Thank you for everyone who's listening. This is the end of our infrastructure outlook discussion, looking ahead to 2022. Again, thank you very much and wishing a very successful 2022 to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.